Working through lectionary text, and last week he declared that we were done with Hebrews. Well, we're not. I told the lectionary people, they think we should stay in Hebrews for a little while. So, and I don't think these are texts that Timothy's probably going to preach on, because they wade pretty deep in Old Testament imagery and all that kind of stuff. But I still find them enormously helpful. And they may not be apparently so kind of at the surface level. But let me begin by asking you a question. When are we most ripe to change our beliefs and our behaviors? For better or worse? When are we most ripe for change? Is it most likely that we'll make some kind of change in our beliefs or our behaviors?
Crisis.
What's that?
Crisis.
Crisis. You want to unpack that, Anine?
Death of a child. This isn't supposed to happen. Anytime something goes against what we held dear. Divorce. Recognizing the way I did marriage. Maybe I had a part of it too. Anytime there's a major,
Okay.
like on bended knee, desperate, God help me.
So there's a very strong psychological principle here. Okay.
I completely agree. Any kind of very heightened state of emotion,
Yeah.
certainly a prolonged one, not just a spike, but something that's lasting.
Sure. Yes.
Surviving something. Like
Yes.
Illness or a car crash. Something
Yeah. When you've
that was a little more miraculous, and all of a sudden you're seeing life a little in a different light because of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so not necessarily hurting, but actually it could be the flip side. Like you feel like you dodged a bullet, and then there's a gravity to work about your life or some miraculous experience. Sure.
I think on the dark side, there is a time when we see something that we've wanted to be or wanted to do and been lured into changing our behavior.
Okay.
Often in a negative way.
Yeah, so if there's, I think what you're saying here, let me kind of rephrase it. If there's an unmet need that you want, right, and there is some kind of powerful enticement to solve that, to provide it for you,
Yes.
then you may change and alter your course to go toward it.
A medical situation that, if you're, say, smoking and all of a sudden you're developing COPD and the doctor says you need to stop, or alcohol, or a vice, and it's if I don't stop this, it's gonna really, endanger my health.
Very good. Yeah. So at this stage of life, we can identify with wake-up calls, right, about our health, the dashboard of our lives. The red lights start lighting up, and the real data comes in. And you're like, crap. Do something or die, right?
Take out that fuse so you don't see those lights.
Yeah. Cue the nervous laughter. And of course, we know all these things are true, right? That when there is this emotional intensity, this urgency, more often when we're hurting than when we're happy, right? And then of course, we have three options, right? We have, essentially, to boil it down, we have three options when we're hurting and we need to change or we want to change beliefs, behaviors, whatever. We can either get stuck or stalled, and therapists love to tell us about what that looks like, right? Where we're neither moving forward or moving back. We're just kind of frozen, motionless, right? And so there's no real hope that things are going to change because we're not changing. We can make progress, right? These experiences can help us make progress, right? We can positively change behaviors. We can value our life more. We can shore up our relationships. I mean, there's 1,000 different ways you could conceive of what progress will look like. And at the end of this, we're going to come back. I'm going to ask you again, what would progress in faith look like, right? And we can regress, right? We can actually go backward, right? And I think it's something we don't talk enough about, probably in the life of the church, is that existential crises of all kinds are existential for a reason. Our very existence is threatened, right? And we can often go backward. On Facebook, we see all these inspirational memes, about faith grows in the darkness, right? And like a seed planted in dark soil, so hope springs eternal, or whatever, And all those things are good. I mean, darkness is where faith thrives, but also faith can be destroyed, if we're honest, right? So I raise all that because when we come to Hebrews, and Ed has already done a really good job of helping us understand kind of the theological problem and the pastoral problem of the whole letter, right? But essentially, we are dealing with people that are at this very kind of moment, right? They are suffering an existential crisis. And what the preacher, what many commentators call the writer of Hebrews, the preacher, because the whole literary form is sermonic in nature. And in fact, it's a collection of many sermons that collectively serve this meta-narrative that the preacher has going on. So Thomas Long, a commentator, calls this person, he or she, the preacher, right? So the preacher is deeply concerned that the people he's writing to are facing an existential crisis. And there's an opportunity here for them to either go forward, get stuck and stalled, or go backward. And what the preacher's most afraid of with these people is that they're going to regress, right? So I think we can immediately identify, all these images are kind of old and foreign to us. We're talking about blood and tabernacles and animal sacrifice and priest, and we've already talked about how, we don't really connect with that, experientially, unless maybe you were Catholic and you had a priest, but your priest was nothing like these priests, right? And your priest's job was nothing like their job. But all of these they're very viscerally real to the people he's talking to. This is the old-time religion. This is the old-time religion of their ancestors. This is the old-time religion of mom and daddy and grandmama and granddaddy and great-granddaddy. This is the religion of the clan, the collective people, the community. They've broken away from that to see God's fulfillment of his covenant promises in Jesus Christ. And yet now, when times are getting hard and they're struggling and they're tired and they're weary, and I think we can connect with this, right? Because we all have times in our spiritual lives, I think, where we're just tired of showing up. Praying faithfully is hard. And serving others is hard, and sacrificing yourself is hard, and hoping and hoping and hoping against hope that things are actually going to change and work out, and they don't, and you feel like even society is going backwards, and it can be so disappointing. I won't get into the election, but we feel this existentially, right? Well, how do you maintain faith in a world which it seems like God is slow in keeping his promises, but of course the biblical writers tell us God is not slow in keeping his promises, but we feel like he's slow. Right? And so we're at risk in those moments of going backward to whatever backward would be for us. Now, backward for us may be different than backward for these Hebrew believers who have a whole sacrificial system in the background. But what happens when you doubt or you stop believing that righteousness has its rewards? What happens? Like if you're sitting here today and you're thinking, I don't think I believe anymore that the Christian way of life pays off. Is that too scary to say out loud?
No, but what do you mean by pays off?
What does anyone mean by pays off?
I don't think it pays, I don't think it's meant to pay off. That's not the bargain.
Okay.
A payoff is, this.
Sounds
that's
transactional.
Yeah, it's quid pro quo. That's,
I think
it's kind of like, I would just say for me, I didn't have children, so it pay off, right? It's relational.
Okay.
Right? I don't cut deals with my kids every day. It's relational.
Okay.
It's not built on, are my kids successful? It's not how it builds out for me, so.
Okay.
I'm gonna take it a little bit different approach. People say I was blessed by something, by God, as if you picked them out to give them some special blessing. I see living as you're using it according to faith is its own blessing. It's, in other words, that's a way that God does bless you. He tells you how you should live, and in doing so, you feel that you've been blessed. And I think that is a big payoff.
Okay. So you're healthy spiritual people.
Yeah.
So your responses are very healthy. All right. But what happens when your religion is not this healthy?
Well, I don't know about my religion, but my faith is not as strong as I would like. And I know what you guys are saying about relation, but I just would like, and so in my personal life, I think there are a lot of signs of God, things he's done. And on the macro, and this does go into the election, but a lot of other things too, I just like to see a little sign.
Yeah.
Or the vision to see the sign that's already there.
Yeah. How about a little something for the effort?
Yeah.
That's from Caddyshack.
I want an outcome.
Maybe the person that you're talking about, maybe that's the point at which they begin facing some of these questions. You know, what have I been, maybe what I've been wanting or expecting out of faith is not the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
Maybe, you know.
Maybe I have not
the wrong
framed
idea. Yeah,
faith
yeah.
correctly.
And so maybe it really makes them finally come to grips with some of these things, begin searching.
Yeah, that's good. So, I mean, I think you can, if you don't feel this way, right? If you've never been in this kind of existential darkness where you wonder if God is showing up for you about things that really matter to you, the health of your children, right? All kinds of things, right? I think you can recognize that there are many people who get to this place, especially if they were handed a religion that was transactional.
I agree with that.
I remember as a young preacher at seminary, I was invited, my father-in-law was a pastor, church in South Texas. He invited me to come down and preach for him. This is back when my sermons were terrible and they were long, and they were either extremely short and I sat down with nothing to say, or they were way too long because I couldn't land the plane, right? And it was a Sunday night, and I remember preaching out of the Psalms, and my sermon title still haunts me to this day. It was that righteousness has its rewards. Because the Psalm text, the flow of it was right moral living ushers forth in God's blessing of you. I mean, it was very true to the text, but not exactly true to the overall narrative of the gospel, right? And I remember people pat me on the back when I got through. Amen, brother. You know, you're right. My father-in-law, who says nothing hardly ever, you know, said some kind word to me about it. You know, and I was like, this is so right. I know what I'm doing. You know, and for years that has haunted me because it was a half truth, right? And the more damage is done by preaching that than acknowledging the real truths, right, that require people to reframe the kind of Christianity that they had been given. So this is kind of a long-winded introduction, but it kind of sets up this existential crisis that the people in Hebrews were facing, so that when we talk about high priest and rituals and blood sacrifice and all that, this is what we're really talking about. And I love this idea from Barbara Brown Taylor, who talks about the fact that, you know, when people are experiencing this kind of darkness, right, they don't really need more Bible studies. Okay, I'm selling against myself here, right? They don't need more Bible studies. They don't need more worship services. They don't need more church activities and Wednesday night suppers, and they don't need more outreach processes. What they really need is more of God. And she says, none of this church activity is evil. Indeed, most of it is good and useful, but it's not the thing itself. The thing we seek, access to the living and healing God. And I think that's a good reminder for all of us, both lay leaders and those who are paid to be good. Right? That people like us they're hungry for the experience of God and a religion that makes the experience of God palpable, right? And where people they're actually saying to God, you know, help me open myself to you. Help me receive what you're trying to give me. All right, so to situate this idea in the context of the flow of Hebrews, in the verses right before chapter 9 that we're going to look at, we've already heard Ed's talk about, you know, this idea of the great high priest and Melchizedek and all that kind of stuff. And then in chapter 8, he goes into this ritual sacrifice system, right? And all about the tabernacle and the Holy of Holies and the outer court and the inner court and the priest and all of those. He kind of recalls to mind the ancient history of the old time religion. And he goes to the beginning. He doesn't just go like to Solomon's temple, right, which was fixed, but he goes all the way back to the wilderness and the tabernacle and the tent and the meeting and all that kind of stuff. And essentially, he's going to make this argument over and over again, of what I call the Mo Betta, the Mo Betta argument, right? That was good. It was, it was of some value, but now we've got more, we've got better. Jesus is more and he's better. And ultimately, the exhortational call is, we're not going back. Religionally, speaking of religion. Obviously, it's referring to something else too, but what it really means is decide today that you're not going back. You will not regress. You will not go back to forms and behaviors and beliefs that never paid off for you. Maybe they were half-truths, maybe they were no truths, right? But don't, in your pain, in your existential crisis, let go of the high and holy and eternal promises that Jesus offers you, which is a pretty profound message, I think. All right, so let's listen to 9 and 11. No, listen to the whole thing, and then we'll come back and break it out. If somebody would read Hebrews 9, 11 through 15, we'll talk about it.
But when Christ appeared as a high priest of all the good things that have come, then through the greater and more perfect tent, not made with hands, that is, not of this creation, he entered once and for all into the holy places, not by means of the blood of goats and calves, but by means of his own blood, thus securing an eternal redemption. For if the blood of goats and bulls and the sprinkling of defiled persons with the ashes of a heifer sanctify for the purification of the flesh, how much more will the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without blemish to God, purify our conscience from dead works to serve the living God. Therefore, he is the mediator of a new covenant, so that all those who are called may receive the promised eternal inheritance, since a death has occurred that redeems them from the transgressions committed under the first covenant.
All right, very good. Thank you, Steve. So here we go, right? All this Old Testament imagery of blood and goats and priests and covenants and, being defiled and being purified and what? Yeah. And camping. It's not what all those RV commercials, those Jeep commercials say. They say it's golden. Oh my God. So let's talk about this for a second. So he's picking up, he's continuing this idea that Jesus, the Christ, is akin to a high priest. So it's this metaphorical comparison, right, to the high priest they knew, the earthly priest, but he's Mo Betta, right? He's a better priest in the order of Melchizedek, but even greater than that, right? So let's go back to the essentials. What is the function of a priest?
A mediator.
What's that?
Mediator.
A mediator. Mediator is a great word. Yeah, so a priest, I always do this, right? The classic image of a priest is one hand on the people of God, loving the people of God, trusting the people of God, understanding the people of God, speaking their language, right? Intimately involved with them. And the other is their hand on God. And like Benjamin Franklin's key, right? They're supposed to be the place where the lightning strikes, right? And they translate the eternal power and glory and truth and beauty of God in words and experiences and rituals that the people can understand. Because if they saw God in God's pure form, they would be terrified. That's the Old Testament idea, right? And similarly, they represent the people to God. They are the intercessor. They are the mediator. They are Moses who pleads that God would not give up on him, if for but one, right? It's such a powerful image that the priest is this go-between. And so the two major functions of the Old Testament priest, one was to administer sacrifices, right, as a proxy for the whole community, right? And we know from Exodus, and there were fellowship sacrifices that were just intended to celebrate the relationship of God with his people, right? And so you honor that, right? there are all these different kind of sacrifices, right? There are Thanksgiving sacrifices, right, for the harvest and for the very real material needs, right? There are the sacrifice of atonement, right? And there were different levels of kinds of sin, and intentional sin and unintentional sin, and so eventually this evolves into this highly complicated ritual system of ritual religious behaviors, and often the giving of either sometimes grain, but mostly animals, right, that were ritually slaughtered, murdered in front of the people, right, as a way of dealing with this existential crisis, right, of when they've been out of relationship with God and they're coming back into right relationship with God and restore the balance and the harmony of their relationship. So, so this is what's in the background, right, of the readers, right? So just think about this for a second. So they have this very visceral religion that's highly ritualized, right? But what they've been given now is really more conceptual, right? I mean, Jesus, like, we're not slaughtering animals anymore, right? There's not this structured, for generations, this place where it happens, and all these rules about how to engage God. How do you experience God? You experience God through all these rules and behaviors and movements and sayings and everything like that. And so it's hard. In that sense, it's hard when you've been have such a concrete religion, and now it's more in the theater of the mind, I believe. And it's not to say that we weren't given these ordinances like baptism and the Lord's Supper, right? But it's sparse, right? The religion of the New Covenant is not heavily ritualized. In fact, it's far more ethical. It leans much heavier on ethical behaviors, right? And so these people are at risk of saying, gee, we've tried this religion of Jesus, right? But it just doesn't seem to be paying off, because they're weary and they're tired and they don't want to do the hard work of ethical living anymore, right? And what if I just go back and I just do the animal thing? When I was a pastor at my first county seat Baptist church, we had a great couple. She grew up Baptist, he grew up Catholic, and he was a bank vice president, Chad, big old bushy mustache Western guy, and his daughter wanted to get baptized, and so he'd never joined the church, and so he said, Brad, can I just join by donation? He didn't really want to get in the water. And that was back at a church that required you to get in the water, which most of our Baptist churches used to be like that, right? And we had no respect for other people's spiritual journeys, right? But I always recommend join by donation. Where's that box I could check off? How much would that cost, right? There are simpler religions, kind of work that way. So I ran across this interesting, this is chase a little bit of a rabbit, but I find it fascinating, and it restores kind of the visceral nature a little bit about it. So the religion they had in mind, not only was it this blood and goats, and the families there in the outer court in front of the altar, and they drag this animal up there, right, that against their own will, that doesn't want to be there. And those of you that didn't grow up on farms or animals or hunters, right, you may not have much experience with dying animals. There's one dying right now. Every time my phone rings. Or that angel gets their wings. I don't know. But it's a very visceral thing, right? Very visceral thing. And that was part of their memory. But this thing of the blessing, and this is kind of new for me. But so one of the things is, so the priest, when they were doing all their the animal sacrifices, they would turn their backs to everybody else, right? And they're doing all their stuff, they're slaughtering the animal, they're cutting into pieces, and they're burning it. This process goes on and on and on, right? And then eventually they get all washed up and they get cleaned up. And then the priestly blessing, this is really interesting to me. The Chazan, who was the cantor, or now it's the Chazan, right? Who was the cantor, the singer, we still have these today. They are the people who had artistic gifts, right, to evoke emotion. Right, the core meaning of the Chazan of the Chazan, or the Chazan, they say, is vision. The person is supposed to help evoke a vision, which I think is really interesting for the role of arts in the church, right? In the very beginning, there was this artistic element to it. The cantors had these lovely voices, if you've ever heard the modern day ones. So the Chazon would start to recite the 15 words of the priestly blessing, which is the Lord bless you and keep you, regard you, and make his countenance to shine upon you, right? But there's 15 Hebrew words. And when the Chazon did that, the priest would turn around and he would do this finger gesture.
Oh.
Really?
Yeah, I never knew this before. It's fascinating to me. The priest would turn around, and as the blessing is being said, he would look at the people, and he would do this gesture.
Live long and prosper.
Right,
That's where it comes from.
yeah.
So Leonard Nimoy was Jewish, and for Star Trek, he developed that gesture.
Wow.
Now, the gesture is intended to create 5 open spaces. 1, 2, between the thumbs, 3, 4, and 5. And the idea was that the full blessing, spiritual blessing of God comes through the priest's fingers onto the people. It's a very visceral experience. It's almost like alakazam, right? Which by the way is a made-up word. So I was like, where did that come from? Maybe that came from that. It didn't. I'm a word nerd, right? So I'm always kind of trying to figure it out. But it's a very visceral experience of the blessing of God, right? And so this is part of their memory of the old-time religion, right? And that made them feel something, right? And they felt like it was immediate, like there was something coming into them, right? The full blessing of God and the promises being made. So I'll raise all that just because what the writer is doing here, starting in 1911, is something very interesting. But when Christ came as a high priest of the good things that have come, then through the greater and more perfect tent not made with hands that is not of this creation, and then he goes on to describe this, that Christ's activities happen in this place. Where is this place? Where does Christ act out his priesthood on behalf of people like you and I? Where does it happen? Or what is the writer trying to remind the readers that what you know is compared to this over here? What is this?
It's inside.
What's that?
It's inside.
Inside what?
In our minds.
Inside our minds.
Or what we call our heart or soul, I guess.
Okay, so it happens inside of us, but what happens inside of us is also happening somewhere else.
Yeah, this is like Isaiah's dream, where you're transported and Christ, who's at the right hand of the Father, is actually in this holy place doing all this stuff face to face. You don't need the imagery anymore of the physical tabernacle out in the desert.
Yeah, and this is a really huge idea, right? Because this is how he begins his argument about why is Christ better, right? And why is what he does more than what you know? Why not? Why you can't go back? Because you've been given something better. So what he's describing here really is this idea that the resurrected Christ has ascended through the clouds, across the cosmos, and like a Carl Sagan documentary, right? Slipped into a black hole and emerged in the realm of God, in the sanctuary of the living God, where God sits on God's throne. He has entered the purity of all existence. He has entered a place whose holiness we cannot comprehend. It's never been defiled by human sin, and whose representative is pure, is not like the purest human priest. There's no blood here anymore. And so he goes through this more perfect tent, right? So the tent conjures up the tabernacle and how it was supposed to be a demarcation between the general world, right, where we believe God is, right? We don't do secular, sacred, binary, but it was supposed to create a sacred space that you flowed into in order to encounter God. But the tent that Jesus goes into now is far more perfect. It is the ultimate. It is the ultimate abode of God. because it's not made with hands. God made, right? It's not of this creation. It is separate. So he's trying to draw them into an imagination of a worship experience that is far better than watching bulls get slaughtered. Now, I've been thinking about this a little bit. I'm going to get to 1 point out of 5 probably, so just, it's fine. I'm not sure we do a good job of this anymore. That in situating our earthly worship in this sanctuary over here as a mirror that reflects what's going on in the very presence of God. And I'm not sure we do as good as we could do in removing the distance between the two. I had a brief flirtation with charismatic religion when I was in my early 20s because I had a boss. I may have mentioned it before, Miles. He's a wonderful guy and really helped me kind of come back to renew my faith. But ultimately it was a kind of faith that I wasn't going there. So I went toward Miles and then went off, other healthier ways, I think. But charismatic churches, some of them, they spend a lot of energy, right, in worship as we're singing, envisioning, kind of guided imagery, helping people envision that they're in the throne room of God, right? And they're surrounded by an angelic host that is worshiping this God night and day. And it's beautiful and it's glorious beyond what you can imagine, that you're all part of that. And as we sing, and we know that it's an emotional experience, right? But they do a lot of hard work, oftentimes in worship, trying to make that happen. Similarly, Mormons, if you have much experience with Mormons, not so much in their normal meeting house, but in their temple, the celestial nature of God is like this huge theme. Visual and the rituals and the abode of God, that's a huge deal. Western Protestantism has become so rational, right, and not emotional, and so sometimes it can be artistic with music. It's less artistic than the icons of our Eastern religion, right? And so, the closest we get to is like, I wish Cindy Fuller was here, but these magisterial organ pieces that are preludes, where they sound like, some of them sound like Wagner's Valkyries are descending on the car, right? Like all these helicopters, right? And some people are going, it's so loud. Why is it so loud, right? Well, and I learned this from Presbyterians. I didn't learn this from Baptists. The reason it's like that is it's supposed to invoke in you a sense of the awesomeness of God descending upon you and enveloping you. And and then sometimes it's not like that at all, right? It's more like a mist.
Today is when it happens to me, and communion is where I think we're closest, because I feel this communion sends across time, space, heaven, and
Communion on All Saints Days.
and even communion on All Saints Day.
Yeah, I would agree, and it's because it's calling us outside of our ordinary life, right? To imagine, to conceive of this intimate communion with God and invoking the very presence of God in symbols, and then we're all equally ingesting the same substance into our bodies. It's the power of art and imagery and symbol and metaphor and poetry and beauty and all of that, which I think is really profound. So part of what the writer of Hebrews is doing here is invoking that what you're not really seeing. You need to reframe your faith, because what's going on, it's just so much better, right? And of course, there's a lot we can say here. So he goes on in 9:12 to say he entered once for all. Once for all. There's so much theology in like 2 words of what he's saying here, right? Which it speaks to the completion of the work, right? And the total inclusiveness of the work for everybody. See, the problem with the sacrificial system was what? It's temporary. Right? It had to be done over and over and over again, right, throughout the year. So while it was visceral, and while we witnessed that this bull is being slaughtered because of me, which is pretty powerful, right? There is a loss of life because of my sins. See, sometimes we reduce the sacrificial system to kind of transactional stuff, but it wasn't just transactional. It was intended to be visceral. right? That you would feel something, like these animals are being slaughtered because of us. There's a lot, when we sin, there is a loss of life and there is a destruction of value, right? Philosophically, underneath the sacrificial system, as primitive as it was, there was this notion that sin causes suffering, sin causes loss of life, sin causes the destruction of value. Because the animals were almost like they were currency. There was an economic model involved, right?
The sin and death components, come together in the old system that Jesus portrayed.
Yeah, and yet it wasn't enough,
Yes.
right? It wasn't enough because it wasn't once for all. It was like, it was like rinse and repeat. And so the older you were living under that sacrificial system, this inevitable sense of despair comes in about why do we just have to keep doing this all of the time? Because we're not getting better. And our national history is one of just like this, right? We rise and we fall, we rise and we fall, right? We make promises we can't keep and we don't keep them, right? And then we get punished and we suffer loss and then God forgives us and he brings us back again. Like, how do you break this cycle, right? And the writer of Hebrews is saying the cycle has been broken by someone who did it for you because you can't ever break the cycle. And so once and for all, into the holy place, not with the blood of goats and calves, but with his own blood. Now, I'm running out of time, but one of the things I wanted to point out about this is we can't reduce Jesus' sacrifice also to a transaction, right? All the cross is it's a transaction that God required in order to satisfy the requirements of his holiness, right? That someone's got to die, and we're not good enough, and so Jesus could be, and so it's a transaction, right? And we know there's a lot of that religion out there, right? I grew up with it. That was the first meaning of soteriology of salvation was that substitutionary atonement, But we just miss so much, and the writer of Hebrews he's stressing multiple times the giving of his own blood, the self-sacrifice, right? The centerpiece is not the death. The centerpiece is that he chose to give up his life. And I would argue the centerpiece of the gospel, the centerpiece of Christianity, and I used this phrase this week, voluntary self-giving love. For me, that's the meaning of the cross. That's the only thing that breaks the power of hate and sin and everything else is voluntary self-giving love. And Jesus did that for us. And so it's yet another reason why his sacrifice is better. And he can provide more because he put that at the very center. Well, I got to stop there. I guess the final big idea is that he talks about how the other reason it's better is because it actually purifies our conscience, where the old system never could. The old system was very external, it was very behavioral, right? But it never sunk to the depths of radically transforming my identity, my moral compass, my moral judgment. It could actually transform me and cleanse me. And the writer that here is arguing that's exactly what Jesus is about. It is religion from the inside out, as opposed to from outside in. So just things to chew on for the week. And we'll come back and talk until next week. Live long and prosper.
Thanks, Brad.
Thanks for your patience.
I know, right? And breathe.